Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. All right, we have a half an hour. We have a number of different things to make it through. As we know, our running sarcasm is we all work in a math-free zone where we use feelings to make public policy, and then we wonder what the hell's going on when we actually have to deal with the honesty of the math. So let's actually do a little bit of fun with honesty of the math. A couple days ago was tax day. Did you know when you paid your taxes, 39 cents out of every dollar you sent in went just to interest? 39 cents of every dollar you sent in as an individual taxpayer. That's the billionaire, that's down to the working stiff that actually had income tax. You paid 39 cents of your tax dollar just to interest. And the point, once again, we're going to go through is understanding how fragile we've made part of the American economy because of the scale of the debt. Remember, every 110, 115 days, we're clicking off another $1 trillion of borrowing. So, yay for that. So we also did another benchmark. Yesterday, we had $100,000 a second we were borrowing. Congratulations once again. It's the third time outside COVID when we've clicked through $100,000 a second. And the reason I break it down to a second is how many people can visualize $1 trillion? It's hard to visualize 12 zeros. So let's actually sort of walk through this. As we're clicking off $100,000 a second, that basically means gross borrowing. Looks like it's going to be, if we stay close to this, $3.151 trillion, $3.151 billion. Now, why that's a big deal? That was yesterday. Today, it fell way down. We're 99,000 something per second. We were expecting to see the number, a way to get this through people's heads. GDP Now, I believe it was yesterday, which is the Atlanta Fed. They have a neat little app you can sign up for. They'll send you updates and give you market predictions on interest rates and these things. But they also give you an estimator of what they think the gross national product is for this quarter. They had a number of 2.9% come out yesterday. That is remarkable. The American people should be given a ginormous hug for how hard they're out there working. Yet, how much of that 2.9% GDP growth that was on the Atlanta Fed's website is because we're spending at this remarkable rate? And just as the left used to attack us when we did tax reform, which actually has this elegance of being proper allocation, they've been spending money at a crazy rate. Remember, $100,000 a second. And here's some of the other parts of the punchline. So I hope I'm not throwing too much out. Tax receipts so far this fiscal year are up 7%. Okay, that's wonderful. But we're still borrowing close to $3 trillion this year. But tax receipts are up 7%, and we're still having to borrow like that. And Medicare is up 10% so far this year. Anyone see a problem? And part of the point we got to walk through is how much is on autopilot, and we as policymakers, because we're terrified to go home and tell the truth, or let's be honest. Let's be honest. A lot of our voters, we haven't told them the truth for so long. How do you get in front of them and say, it's not foreign aid, it's not waste and fraud, you can't tax your way out of this? So I've shown this chart a number of times. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, the House isn't in order.
The House will be in order. The gentleman in the gallery will remain silent, please.
And Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, it's for everyone, this building has a horrible echo, so it's not being mean, just it has this weird sound quality. All right, so if you look at a chart like this, you see the blue area? That's all we get to vote on. We functionally only get to vote on about 25% of all spending, and part of that, half that is basically defense. So if you don't want us to cut defense, you don't want us to do, you want us to maintain that, you do realize that the non-defense appropriations in this place, it's like 12%, 13% of our spending. That's all we vote on. Everything else is on autopilot. And on my chart here, I have $890 billion as interest. Well, we already know the interest number now looks like it's going to be 1.1. It could actually, if interest rates stay where they've been this week, 1.2 trillion making interest. So some more time, let's do this. Medicare will be $1.45 trillion. Interest will be 1.2 trillion. Medicare will be 839. Defense will be right there. Now, remember, we were just calculating that Medicare spending has already moved up almost 10% this year. We have Medicare coming in as number 3 and defense coming in as number 4. It's a lot different than the folklore out there in society. And part of the point we keep trying to make here is we've made this society, this government, the world actually in some ways, incredibly fragile because as interest rates move up, it's starting to consume everything around us. So, look, I have not done this chart in years, but we've updated it. But understand, it's a little hard to see. We'll put it up on one of our websites. But we're right here at 2024. We were supposed to only be borrowing about $1.5 trillion this year. Looks like we may double that. So the chart, and this chart is only a few months old and it's already that far out of date. But understand, it's an interest rate scenario chart. Right now, as where CBO has us 3.5%, well, we're already over that. And at 3.5%, in functionally 9 budget years, we're borrowing almost close to $4 trillion a year. I say that's actually 8 budget years. If we go up a full point, we're well over $4 trillion. If we go up to the 5.5, which is historically closer to what we were before the fake years, the previous decade of suppressed interest rates, if you do the 35 years before that, even if you take out the Volcker years, 5.5 was closer to what norm was. And then you're starting to approach, in 9 budget years, almost $5 trillion in a single year interest. And there's our problem. You know, we've listened to speeches already today, people telling us this is a human right, that's a human right. Okay, fine. Do you want to think like an economist or someone that believes in fairy tales? Because we actually make public policy here by our feelings, not by facts. Because the facts are uncomfortable and they don't sound that great on campaign stumps. And I actually originally intended to come here, Mr. Speaker, and just do some basic economics charts and then do some optimism of solutions. But let's run through these charts and then we'll actually talk about the reality that there is hope. There is a way to deal with this. It just would require thinking. And we're so busy having the drama of, are we going to remove another speaker? Are we going to knife each other over some foreign aid? And understand, I know some people passionately care about Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan. Add up the total amount of money, remove the money, it functionally comes back to the United States, and you're talking like 3-4 days of borrowing. I mean, people have no sense of the scale. So you look at a chart like this, and here's part of your classic problem. Remove COVID. That's COVID right there. And just look at the basic chart, and all we're trying to say is historically, next year, a bunch of TCJA, which was the tax reform, expires. Your tax rates go up next year. If you have a LLC, a pass-through, a subchapter S, an employee-owned, your taxes go up next year. And that's already based in this number. We still functionally get a little less than 18% of the size of the economy in taxes. But we're basically the blue line going up that you got to understand. And I know it's a 30-year chart, and no one wants to think about something 30-year chart, but this is the crisis. Tax receipts stay stable as a percentage of the economy. So I've already brought charts here before that show, hey, here's times when we've had remarkably high marginal tax rates. Here's times when we've had really low tax rates. And you get this percentage of the economy that always sort of falls in between about 17 to 19. It's always right there in that bandwidth. So the secret is have a bigger economy. Understand, over the next couple decades, Congressional Budget Office has a number where saying, hey, 2054, that's a long time from now. What is that? That's like, 28 budget years from now. 31.9% of the economy is in spending. But tax receipts are still projected to be about 17.9, 18%. So the tax receipts stay level, but our spending, and what is the primary driver of spending? This is the thing we share, at least I share, that gets you unelected, but it happens to be truth. From today through the next 30 years, 100% of growth of borrowing, and most of the growth of spending, is demographics. We got old. The fact of the matter is, when I was a kid, $5 to $6 was spent for those under 18 for every $1 for a senior. Today, that is reversed. Today, we spend about $5 for a senior for every dollar we spend for those under 18. It's demographics. There's different population dynamics. But those numbers and then the healthcare costs, because if Medicare is going up just 10% so far this fiscal year, you got to see what the numbers look like over the next decade, particularly as baby boomers, what is it, close to 70-some million of us. So if you had a revolution in changing the cost of healthcare, which we've written about and actually designed ways to do it, but you couldn't get a hearing around here because there's too many damn lobbyists running up and down the hallways saying, that'll affect our business model, or that will affect the bureaucracy that's here. The bureaucracies, you understand, have their own lobbyists here. Math will win, but this place will still curl up in a fetal position of fantasy. And one more time, it keeps ticking away from us. Remember, 1 year ago, we were estimating, saying, this the 2024 budget will only borrow about 1.3, then it was 1.5, then maybe 1.6, and we're looking at numbers now that the public borrow, that means selling bonds, is 2.8, that the total borrowing now is approaching, and this is from the Treasury. This isn't from my joint economic economist or Schweikert's brain. This is from the Treasury's own numbers. They're at now $1,143.6 billion interest this fiscal year. And this was put together before the most recent pop in interest rates. So I've said this, and this seems to upset some folks. Congress has made a governing decision. And it's not a governing decision whether we want to go through the chaos of removing another speaker or the chaos of letting the Democrats have more power around here. It's the chaos that we've made the decision to have the bond markets in charge of your country. Because if we have a failed bond auction, do you understand the cascade of hell that happens in this country and around the world? So just our moral, fiscal sanity, economic obligation to demonstrate to those who are willing to buy our country's debt that we're adults, that we understand what's going on, we understand our demographics, we understand our earned entitlements, that we got to pay, and how are we going to pay them. When functionally, the taxes you just paid, 39 cents out of every dollar you paid went just to cover the interest. And it will be worse next year. So you live in a country where we've made the decision, let's put the bond market in charge of your country because we're too much of a wimps to tell the truth. And for those who are going to say, well, Schweikert, if you would just vote against this or that, and they don't understand those are rounding errors. The scale, it's not today. It's as you move over the next couple years, the scale of borrowing is structural. It is what we are demographically. And heaven forbid in 8 years, 9 years, when the Social Security Trust Fund is exhausted, and to my Democrats who get cranky when you can't use the word exhausted. That's what the Social Security Actuary Report, if you would actually read the math, actually says. They use the word exhausted because it's gone. And then at that moment, you get a 25% cut in your Social Security check, and we double senior poverty in America. And yesterday, we had a Social Security subcommittee hearing in the Ways and Means, and one of the members, I think Jody Arrington gets credit for this, asked a simple question. For you Democrats, how many of you believe the only solution, would you support policy changes and raising taxes? Nope, they only want raising taxes. And over here, the Republicans said, we got to do everything. At least the Republicans on the committee and the Republican witnesses told the truth. The Democrats are so locked in that there's this fantasy, and I've shown the charts over and over and over. You can raise all the caps. And if you give no benefits, raise the caps, so you've now turned Social Security functionally into everything that FDR swore it would never be. It's functionally a wealth transfer system. It only covers half, at best, the shortfall. So when you hear people say, well, we have a solution, we're going to fix it through tax hikes. You do understand that what the fraud is to be able to close the gap, you got to tax unearned capital gain, unrealized capital gains all up and down the economy. So we're still trying to figure out what Democrats mean when they say that, because we're walking through the details in their proposals and we're having trouble making the math work. So you have a house, you have a building, you have a retirement account, you have investments. Do they get to come in and take 12%, 12.4% of everything you gained that year? Because that's the only way you start to cover these scales of shortfall. The first year, so 2033, first year Social Security is empty. The shortfall is $616 billion. Every dime of defense is in the $800 billion range. Do you understand the scale of what's coming at us? And look, I've already done these charts before over and over and over saying, hey, here we are right now. We're actually a little higher than that. This is interest rates. We're probably at 3.6 now. We're going to go higher with the recent bond auctions. Here's what we were during the 2001 to 2022, sort of the suppressed years of the Federal Reserve suppressing interest rates. But when we go back to 1975 to 2001, understand what the average interest rate was on U.S. sovereign debt. It was 3.5%. I just showed you a chart a moment ago that said we're almost at Armageddon if we go to 5.5. So don't think it's some sort of crazy dystopian fantasy. Oh, you're never going to get that high. Our math, we're not even going up to what the historical average was. But we want to live in a fantasy world. And just another chart trying to show where interest rates are and where they're going. I wanted to do this one again because I had someone, it was looking at the video on YouTube from last week's floor speech, and I used this chart. And we had a misunderstanding, so I want to walk through it again. This is the line. This line here is Social Security. This line is Medicare spending as a percentage of GDP. Understand, one of the key differences in Medicare is there's a trust fund, but it only covers maybe 30, 40%. It's the hospital portion. The rest comes out of the general fund. Social Security, even when the trust fund is exhausted, 75%, and then it falls to 70 and a little bit less, of that comes from your taxes. Right now, for every dollar you pay in, they basically take that, they put it out the door, and then they reach over and cash in a little bit of the special trust bonds, T-bills, treasury bills they have to pay out, and that's what's exhausting the trust fund. So when you see this, this is just spending, not borrowing, spending according to GDP. But what's fascinating is sometime in the next decade, you actually have Medicare taking more of the total economy than Social Security. But the thing that I was surprised no one noticed, if Medicare is at functioning in the 30-year window, gets as high as 6.9% of the entire economy, and then Social Security is another 5.9% of the economy, and that's just the two earned retirement programs. So you start to think about that, is if that's consuming that much of the entire economy, how do you pay for the rest of government? How do you pay for military? How do you pay for anything else? You start to understand how you get very quickly the government spending starts getting around 31, 32% of the entire economy. And that's actually calculated on last year's interest rates. Think what those numbers will be over the next few months when we update them on what happens if the interest rate environment goes back to normal. So, Social Security subcommittee yesterday, the Democrats' solution for Social Security was, well, we just need to tax people more. Okay. Problem is, of the crisis that we're on the cusp of, 2/3 is health care, 1/3 is Social Security, and the Social Security Trust Fund still has another 8 years or 9 years. So when we did tax reform, dirty little secret that the Democrats never want you to hear, the top income, so that top 20% of income earners, do you know they actually today pay a higher percentage of federal income taxes? A higher percentage of federal income taxes than before tax reform? The U.S. tax code actually got more progressive. Now, a lot of that was because the bottom quartiles, we almost removed from paying income taxes. Now, they still pay payroll taxes. They pay in their Social Security. They pay in their Medicare. They pay into their unemployment. But from the income tax standpoint, if you take a look, the bottom quartiles functionally pay nothing. Top 20% today pays 71% of all taxes. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, how many minutes do I have left? Thank you, Speaker Pro Tem. So I'll do more of this in a future speech. I want to go through these fairly quickly because I want to end on something that's a little more optimistic than some of these more dystopian numbers. This is Social Security faces a $39 trillion shortfall over the next 30 years. $36 trillion if subtracting the trust fund. So let's just, functionally, what we're saying here is this is income. Payroll taxes and benefits. The red, you see the little green part here? That's actually up to the moment the trust fund is exhausted. That's interest we get from the general fund. So the general fund borrows the money, we pay a little interest back. See the purple here? That's how much is going out the door. See this up here? That's the interest covering if the general fund covers the shortfall. These numbers are so stunningly ginormous, a word my 8-year-old likes to use, ginormous. So when you think about this, if Social Security itself has a structural $36, $39 trillion shortfall, what happens when I come to you and explain Medicare $80, $90 trillion shortfall. Actually, I think it's closer to 90 something now. And that's 100%, when you add in the interest, 100% of all the debt from today through the next 30 years. Just meant to show this to try to make the point again. And it's sometimes like talking to a golden retriever. They're adorable, but at the end of the day, they're still adorable and didn't really understand a word you said. Some of my Democrat colleagues, when you walk through saying, okay, here's your proposals of raising the cap on all taxpayers, and what the outlays are expected on Social Security, that it doesn't actually close the gap. If you just, one more time, this chart does it by percentage of GDP, but let's conceptually one more time process this. So, trust fund is almost gone. You basically say everyone now pays 12.4%. You pay 12.4, that's your Social Security tax. And you give no benefits, no additional benefits for the folks over the cap. You cover, let's be generous. Let's say it's 50% of the shortfall. And you basically have chewed up all the potential taxes that you needed to shore up Medicare. And there becomes the math problem, is you will almost never see someone from the left who will, to be honest, saying, well, to save Medicare and Social Security and a couple of these other programs they care about, here's the scale. You'll even saw the president stand behind that microphone here at the State of the Union, and did you notice he only talked about the Medicare taxes, and that didn't solve the problem. It just shored up part of the trust fund for a little bit. Still, the vast majority of spending comes out of the general fund. So look, we've come here repeatedly and said there are solutions. We actually, several months ago, wrote an entire chapter in the economic position of the Republicans on the Joint Economic Committee. And I thought I was going to get absolute hell for it because I stood on one of the third rails of politics. We actually did, I had 5 economists work on a paper. It's a whole chapter in here, chapter 3, and we talked about what would happen in society if we took on obesity. Turns out, single greatest thing you could do to lower the debt of the United States, produce growth, family formation, all those things, and we were coming up with 5 trillion, 7 trillion. We're right now doing the math, updating that chapter. Turns out, I'm not committing to it because we still have weeks of math to do. It could be $9 trillion over the decade. The single greatest thing we can do to save this country and start to stabilize our debt is actually moral. Let's make our brothers and sisters, give them the opportunity to be healthier. There's a way to do it, Mr. Speaker. And maybe I should stop coming and doing the dystopian anger about people not wanting to deal with the realities of the math. And maybe we should, I'll try to spend a little more time talking about the fact there are solutions. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stand adjourned.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye.